She married him to bear his heir. He asked his neighbor to look for sorcerers or a wizard to help them find the real Celine. However, he said, there is no need to think about it anymore. But when Celine realized that he had found out that she was not Celine, she felt scared and nervous and said to herself, there is no need to think about anything. My fate is sealed. And she remembered her neighbor's expression when she greeted him and said, my neighbor's reaction when he saw me makes me sure that my neighbor remembers Celine clearly. Is the punishment for impersonating the Grand Duchess so terrible? Is it possible that it could reach the point of execution? And here she began to imagine what they would do to her and said, I am a woman who unintentionally changed her identity. They will surely misunderstand me. There is no escape. Will they torture me to tell the truth? Or will they guillotine me? They deliberately brought someone who claims to be my former lover. Have they already discovered my secret? Is it really that difficult to have a smooth wedding without problems? No. Even if I am already in the lion's den, I can survive. I just need to think a little. All I have to do is think of a suitable solution. I can do it. And here Barras noticed that Celine was feeling tense, and it was obvious. So he said, thinking that she was a witch, I thought all witches were brave, but it seems I was wrong. Then he turned to the other side and said with a smile, in any case, she is a different girl. But at this time, an enchanted bird was flying above them and watching them. Then it returned to its owner and told him what it saw. And here a strange-looking lady asked him, standing far away, how are things going? And here the sorcerer said, actually, but the lady, full of wounds and injuries, interrupted him and said with a smile, I hope she is doing her job properly. And here she means the woman who is in Celine's body. But the sorcerer angered her when he said to her, don't you have anything better to do than gossip? So she said to him angrily, what are you talking about, you fool? But suddenly a person standing in the dark arrived and said to her, listen, I know that waiting is frustrating for you, but please be patient. Vinist and I will take care of it. Then he covered her and said, also, the weather is still very cold. And here Vinist sent his bird again. And here the scene changes to Barras, who started saying to himself, at first, I must feign ignorance. Things won't go my way if she knows that I'm aware of everything. But there is no sign of soul exchange at all. And it will be even worse if the soul escapes and returns to its original body. Urging the soul to flee the body in order to capture it is a futile strategy. Then he looked at Celine and continued to say to himself, I don't know exactly why you approached me, but until I find a way to bind the souls together. Here she smiled at him, feeling strange about his gaze. And he continued to say to himself, then she must not dare to think of running away until I have no choice but to cooperate with her, until I can achieve what I want. I have no choice but to cooperate with her. I don't know what I'm even doing. The real Celine is a beautiful woman in her own right. But then he remembered her gaze and laughter at him. Then he said, even if it's not the real Celine who is staring at me. And here Celine felt tense from his gaze and said to herself, what's wrong with him? Then she said to herself, instead of trying to find the real Celine, didn't Duke Barras notice that his wife's soul has changed? I can use this to my advantage. And here she remembered her previous life and said to herself, whether in novels or TV shows, there is only one magical solution to all problems. And here she said with great determination, memory loss strategy. And as a former actress, it will be very easy. Then she looked at Barras and continued to say to herself, I don't know when the Duke started to suspect me, so I'll pretend I don't remember anything since my first night. Yes, this is the right plan. And here, when she looked out the window, she noticed and said to herself, but where are we? And here she said, doesn't it seem like we're going in a different direction from our house? And Barras said, the road for horses is different from the road for carriages, so that's why. Maybe we need to detour a bit. But it won't take long. And here Celine said to him, I'm not hungry, so what about you? But Barras didn't answer her and looked at her in silence. So Celine said, I think you didn't have breakfast this morning, so I was just asking because I was worried about you being hungry. And here the neighbor gave a basket of food to Barras, who said to her, We're still a bit far from the outskirts of the city. Then he gave her the basket of food and said, Take this at least and eat something. But Celine smiled and said to him, I didn't mean me, I meant you. And here Barras looked at her in astonishment and blushed and said, It's okay. I'm fine. And here, when they arrived in the city, Celine began to look around in amazement and said to herself, Is this real? This is completely different from the square. It looks like a place where fairies live. While Barras was looking at her in silence, he then said to himself, As if she is seeing a city inhabited by humans for the first time. If she is a witch who lives alone in a mountain valley, then everything would make sense. And here, when Celine noticed his gaze at her, she felt tense and started saying to herself, Why is he staring at me like that? I feel like he's saying fake, something different, a different topic. So from her tension, she said, My backside hurts after riding in the carriage for so long. Doesn't the horse's backside hurt too from running like this? But in truth, Celine was screaming with tension in her thoughts. Damn it, this is hell. Stop making the atmosphere even stranger. And here the carriage stopped, and Jart said to Barras, We have arrived at the place you spoke of. And Barras said, Okay. At this time, Celine said, Luckily. And here Barras got off the carriage first. And here Celine was looking at him in tension and saying to herself, Wait, where are you going now? You're not going to drop me off here to finish the job alone and go back to the castle alone, are you? But Barras gave her his hand and said, Give me your hand, and I'll help you down. And here Celine looked at his hand in astonishment, and then did so. And Barras helped her down from the carriage, blushing. Then he let go of her hand and turned his head away and said, Let's stop at a restaurant to eat before we go straight to the castle. We'll get hungry on the way. And when he left, Celine said in surprise to herself, Why didn't he hold my hand? Then she sighed in anger and went and took his hands. So Barras was shocked and blushed, and she blushed too and said to herself, This is like a date. And Barras was also saying to himself, Happy, we look like lovers. And here they went to the restaurant, and the table was full of food. And Celine was enjoying the food and saying to herself, The soup before the meal, the bread, and the main courses are all so delicious. But when she looked at Barras, she felt tense and said to herself, But I feel uncomfortable with his gaze. Then she felt sad and said to herself, He was with me all night in the hut. And to offer me delicious food like this, I only feel like we're a little closer now. I have to lie to you, and that makes me feel really bad, but I need to live now. My future, please take care of things here. And her future, the Celine who is screaming inside her. Then she started saying to herself, Memory loss? Yes, I am Celine. I have lost my memory. I have lost my memory. Okay. So she said to Barras, I have a question. What is our relationship? And here Barras was shocked by her question and looked at her in surprise. And here she clarified her question and said, I mean, you come to my room at night, you give me gifts, and most importantly, the location of the bedroom as well. So I thought about it, and I think we're married. Do you think the same way? But he didn't answer her and started drinking his tea in silence. And here, when Celine said to him, Why don't we do what any couple would do? Here Barras spat out his tea. Then he wiped his mouth and said, I think this needs some clarification. And Celine said to her, I'm just asking. Then she said to him, If you're surprised by what I'm saying, then I'm sorry. Apparently, I've lost my memory. Then she started saying to herself, Since I won't be able to achieve my goal if my identity as a witch is discovered, I think I'll make up an excuse, but whatever the case, I'll go with the flow. And here Barras said to her, First of all, we are a couple. And here Celine was saying to herself, Now he'll give me the answer I want. But she was shocked when he asked her and said, "How much do you remember?" And here she remembered and said to him, "I don't know the exact date. We were at night, and I was adjusting the curtains and you asked me to go to sleep. And the next day I went out for a while and came back and spilled blood on the bed. It's the first day. I don't think you remember anything before that. Am I right?" And Celine nodded her head. And here Barras said to her, "That was the day we had our wedding ceremony." Then he got up and said, "I think you're wondering why there is no marital relationship between us." And Celine said, "Ah, yes." And Barras said, "We had an arranged marriage." And here Celine said to herself, "What kind of events will unfold in this novel? Ah, an arranged marriage?" At the same time, Barras said, "And since you might not feel comfortable, we decided to sleep together as husband and wife after 10 days of the ceremony. Of course, you won't remember that. Tomorrow is exactly the 10th day." And here Celine was shocked, and she said to herself, "I'm doomed." And here the scene changes after they return to the carriage, and Celine is saying to herself, "What should I call this situation? I've been completely captured. He's really driving me crazy. I know the monster Duke, but this is a blatant lie. I can't even say that I know this isn't true. What should I do? What should I do? I thought I had barely passed the turning point, and the obstacle is bigger." And all this time, Barras was looking at her in silence. Then he said to himself in tension, "How could you take the body of a married woman? You didn't even think about it. You are really a dirty witch in many ways. Is this so shocking?" Then in anger, he clenched his fists and continued to say to himself, "But I won't let you get away with it. You said the word husband and wife without even knowing the meaning of your words." And here he remembered when she said to him, "Excuse me, are we not married?" Then in anger he said, "You'll see, I'll crush you." And here the scene changes to the next evening, which is supposed to be the 10th day when they are supposed to be together. So Celine decided and said, "Okay, it's settled. Let's get drunk and stretch out. It's the worst, but I can't think of any other way, so there's nothing I can do. And I have no choice but to postpone the matter until I come up with a smart idea. But where can I get alcohol? I don't know where the cellar or kitchen is." Then she came out of her room and continued to say to herself, "I can't do anything. I'll go to the market. Let's buy a drink and come back." And she put on her robe and continued to say to herself, "I won't run away. I'll come back. So it's safe." Then in tension, she looked out the window and said to herself, "Someday, I hope the day will come when I can communicate well with Barras." But at this time, Barras was planning to do something to her and said to himself, I finally got what I wanted." And he looks at a box and says on the bracelet in it, "I barely got it from the black mark, the soul circle that binds the soul to the body. And it was originally intended for therapeutic purposes. His goal is to trap the soul while the wounds of the body heal, but due to its side effects, it is now in the possession of a crazy man." As he looked at it, he remembered and said to himself, "It has deadly side effects. Well, if that happens, the witch will die, but I will make sure she doesn't die. So it will be fine." He arrived at her room and said, "There's nothing about her being in the room." He went and knocked on her door, saying, "Maybe she was asleep and couldn't feel me." He stopped knocking and realized that she was not in her room. Therefore, when Anna came with lunch, she understood and was shocked, saying, "Oh my God!" Barras looked at her angrily and said, "Close the north now." Celine bumped into someone and apologized. He grabbed her hands tightly. When she looked at him, it turned out to be the sorcerer Finist. He suddenly let go of her hands and smiled, saying, "I'm really so sorry. It's my fault. I thought you were someone else." He then left quickly. Celine held her hands and looked at him in surprise, saying to herself, "He's strange." The soldiers arrived in the city led by Barras, who shouted at them, Search every corner and don't leave a single spot." They did so, and left. Barras said to himself, "We will continue searching like this until dawn. In the morning I will have to reweave the tracking network. But did she run away because she didn't want to get married?" He remembered her scared and said, "If she didn't want it, she could have waited a little longer and talked to me. I've already waited 10 days, so how long do you expect me to wait?" Angrily, he said, "Let's just wait until I catch her. I will never let her go." But when he saw her from afar and noticed a lock of her hair, he was shocked and said to himself, "It's her." He quickly went to her and grabbed her quickly. Then he looked at her nervously and said, "I hope her soul remains on that bridge." And here, when Celine looked at him, she left him quickly. Here, Celine was shocked when she saw Barras in this state and said, "What's happening? Why is your skin so pale?" And here, Barras looked at her hands in silence, then quickly put his face on them, happy, and began to say to himself, "I'm determined to grab her and throw her forcefully into her room alone." And here, Celine blushed with embarrassment and said, "Barras." At the time, the neighbor said to the young soldiers, "Disband, disband," then looked at them tensely and said to himself, "I was hoping that the Archduchess would be able to hold my master tightly and suppress his murderous nature, and it seems that she succeeded as I thought. But in the end, she's a witch." At the time, Barras asked her, "What are you doing here?" Celine blushed with embarrassment and said to him, "I think I need a nightcap, so I went out to buy some wine." And here, Barras was shocked and said to himself, "Wine?" Then he looked at her angrily and continued to say to himself, "Are you saying that you caused all these problems just because of wine? And you burned my heart and soul with you like this? And because of wine, you also stayed up all night in the forest that day?" And here he said, "It seems that you didn't sleep because of drinking wine last night, did you?" And here she felt ashamed and said to herself, Did I get drunk that day with Barras? However, I didn't cross any boundaries, so don't worry too much." And here she said to him, "I'm sorry." Barras, tensely, said, "It's okay." But Celine, to herself, was feeling embarrassed and said to herself, "I drank a lot, but it seems that I don't really have a habit of drinking, and I think this body can't drink or tolerate much alcohol. I feel so embarrassed." And here she imagined the situation she would be in and said, "But what will I do? My plan to delay our bed sharing by the power of alcohol is now impossible." And here Barras was looking at her in silence and suddenly leaned over and said to her, "Give me your feet." And here Celine blushed with embarrassment and said to herself, "My feet? Is he asking me to put my feet on his lap?" So she said to him, "My feet." Here, and Barras nodded. And here Celine began to think shyly, and Barras waited. And here she said to herself, "I guess there's no other way. I'll close my eyes." And then she put her foot on his lap, and suddenly Barras grabbed her foot. And here Celine looked at him in surprise, and here he put the magic anklet on her foot, and then smiled, saying to himself, "I've put it on her now, so even if you run away, I can find you. And even if you cry and beg later, I won't let you go." Then he looked at her in a scary way and said, "The soles of your feet are smaller than my palms." At the time, Celine said to him, "An anklet? Is this a gift?" And she was happy and looking at him with joy, saying, "Thank you. I will keep it well." Then she laughed and said, "His voice is so beautiful and clear." Then suddenly she said to herself in tension, "But last time it was a shoe and now an anklet? Does he have a foot fetish?" Then she turned to him and they looked at each other. And here Barras said to her, "Let's go home." Celine said, "Yes, but—" Suddenly she said to him, "But are my drinking habits really that bad?" Barras thought for a moment and said, "I've never seen such drinking habits before, and from now on you are not allowed to drink when I'm not around." Celine asked, "Can I drink when you are around?" Barras looked at her in silence and then smiled and said, "It's okay when I'm there." Celine said happily, "So I can drink today?" Barras looked at her in silence, and here the scene changes. Celine is sitting in frustration and says, "To cut a long story short, nothing happened last night. As soon as we arrived, he put me in my room immediately and made his doll guard me all night. And then, morning came." In sadness, she began to say to herself, "It's funny that I'm the one who tried everything to avoid sleeping with you. Why do I feel this way? How can you leave like this so nonchalantly?" Then she looked at herself and said, "I'm not unattractive, am I? I'm an objectively beautiful heroine, aren't I?" Then, tensely, she said to herself, "I look a little sick. Maybe I lack energy. It doesn't seem to suit him. He's the one who looks strong and tough." And here she imagined a picture in her mind and said, "More vibrant, kind, and charming." So she thought for a while and then said, "Should I try it? Who knows? Maybe if I act nicer." And here she blushed with embarrassment and said, "Maybe he'll accept it." At that time, Barras went out to get some fresh air and said to himself, "Finally, I'm done with all the paperwork." And here he remembered how Jart was with him and said, "That little fool cornered me until lunchtime." And he remembered that Jart was saying to him, "Work hard like you did when you were preparing for the exam." So he said angrily, "I think that fool has become even more foolish lately. I wonder what Celine is doing now." At that time, Anna arrived with lunch for Celine. And here, Barras said to himself, "I think she's about to eat lunch. If I'm lucky, I might be able to hear her laugh sometimes, not bad." And here, Anna was saying to Celine, "Did you enjoy your meal?" Celine said, "Yes, it was delicious." And then a girl came out from behind her and said, "Anna, I brought someone I would like to introduce to you. Her name is Mitheline Augos, of the Augos Viscount family, who has served the Grand Duke's family for generations." And Mitheline said to her, "It is an honor to meet you, Lady Anna. You are so kind and good-hearted. I brought her here believing that it would be good for her to be your servant." And here, Mitheline said, "I was supposed to be your servant, but a few months ago, I fell ill and almost died. Fortunately, I met a good doctor and survived the crisis, but I had to spend some time recovering. But I wasn't able to enter the palace on time. But I was so eager to meet you that I asked if I could get a job as a maid. Even now, I'm so happy that I finally got to meet you. Thank you, Your Grace." "Here," Celine said to her. "Oh, I see." Then in shock, she remembered and said to herself, "Oh, wait a minute. Now that I think about it, the nice girl I was thinking about earlier," so she said in shock, "Was it her?" And here, Anna was looking at them in silence. Then she said to herself, "The Grand Duchess's expression isn't very kind, but I'm glad she accepted it without saying anything." The Grand Duchess had not asked for anything since she came of age. She had never complained about simple meals and unattractive clothes, and she had never asked for any of the furniture in the dilapidated country castle to be replaced. At most, she had said that she would like to go out a little sometimes. All she had ever spent of the Grand Duke's allowance was a few coins. It was clear that she was not hiding anything or that she had any ulterior motives, but it was also hard to believe that she was so naive and innocent. Perhaps by tomorrow the Empress would find out, and here she meant Barras's sister, whom he had not told about his marriage. Anna continued and said, "It seems that the master thinks he can get married quietly just by informing the Emperor in writing. But it is impossible for the Empress, who holds the Emperor in her grasp, to believe it. And the Empress is the woman. She has lived a life where she does not need to hide her feelings. She is the most expensive woman in the empire. So what if she found out that the woman of illegitimate birth had hastily become a noble lady, and that she had only become the wife of her younger brother?" So she fell silent in tension, and then sighed and said to herself, "She is my dearest friend, but she does not have the personality to be considerate of others and speak kind words. I will not bully her or drive her away just because I disagree with her. Well, whatever you say, my innocent little lady, I hope nothing bad happens to you." And here, Maitelaine said to her, Would you like me to serve you your meal? While Anna closed her eyes, wishing fervently that Celine would be all right. And so, Mitelaine prepared tea for Celine and poured it for her. When Celine had drunk it, Mitelaine asked her, "Grand Duchess, did you enjoy it?" And Celine, "Ah, yes," while she was thinking to herself, "She's such a refreshing and kind person." And so, Mitelaine smiled and said, "Thank goodness, I've been practicing a lot." While Celine was thinking to herself, "She's smart, and she has an image that seems to fit well with Paras." And here, Barras arrived. He sat down with Celine and Hina. When Matal saw him, she felt scared, and her hand started shaking. But when Celine looked at her and saw her in this state, she said to herself, "You're nervous. I understand that. Of course, anyone would be nervous if they met such a handsome man. I was like you too." Then she lowered her head and continued to say to herself, I feel so stupid. Offering affection doesn't change a person's core." But at this time, Barras was looking at Celine silent. Suddenly, he gestured for Mathal to leave, and she bowed and did so, leaving quickly. When she went outside, she sat on the ground in fear and started to say to herself while crying, "I was so scared, I almost cried. I was so nervous and my hand was shaking. My nervousness increased because I was afraid to make a mistake and be punished." On the other hand, the Grand Duchess really surprised me. Even in front of the Grand Duke, she was calm and not at all nervous. So she blushed with shame and started to say, "Grand Duchess, I'll do my best. I won't lose to the Grand Duke, and I will become a wonderful servant worthy of the Grand Duchess." And here we return to Celine, who was feeling frustrated and with unhealthy thoughts running through her head. At this time, Barras was blushing with embarrassment and saying to himself, in a short moment she changed her expression several times. She is a very busy and kind person. Here he looked at her and then said, "What about having dinner together?" And Celine said happily, "Of course." And here Barras blushed with embarrassment at her reaction. Then he smiled and started to say to himself, "If she wants, we can go for a walk and have some champagne while we do it. I don't think she'll refuse." At this time, Celine looked at Paras and said to herself, "Let's come back to our senses." Then she started saying nervously, "The reason I envied Mithal. In the end, because I wanted to capture Paris's attention, right? We are already married and we have been apart for 2 days and 1 night. I did everything I could, but now I want to spend more time with him." So she got up and said to herself, "I'll be more assertive." Then she said to him, "I want you to take me on a tour of the outer castle." And here they looked at each other for a bit. Celine, feeling nervous, said to herself, "It's time to make a move." But Paras agreed, smiling at her. Celine blushed in embarrassment, feeling flustered. As Paras offered her his arm, he said, "Let's go." Celine said, "Okay," and took his arm. Paras thought to himself, "After all, the castle is quite dark and barren. It might not suit her taste." Suddenly, Celine pointed to a building and asked him, "What kind of building is this?" Paras replied, "This place is sometimes used when guests arrive or when a banquet is held." "It's empty now." Celine started pulling him along, saying, "I see." Paras turned to her and thought to himself, "She's skillfully pulling me towards this building. What kind of power does this rabbit-light woman possess?" Then, feeling bashful, he closed his eyes, smiled, and said, "But I'll let myself be pulled along, even by this small force. It's not bad." Celine continued pulling Paras along, thinking to herself, "There's no one in this building, right? All right, then. Thanks to the atmosphere and luck." And here she imagined him kissing her. She continued, saying, "Maybe we could exchange kisses? Just thinking about it makes me drift off into a reverie." But, as they walked towards the building, Celine thought to herself, "Let's go there first." A female ghost was behind them. She continued to follow them. When they entered, Celine said, "By the way, it's really quiet in here." Suddenly, as she was about to take a step, she heard a sound. She grabbed him tightly and said, "Didn't you hear something just now?" Paris replied calmly, "I think I heard Nevis's voice." Celine asked him fearfully, Who is that?" Paris said confidently, "He's a ghost who lives on the 4th floor of this building." Celine started crying and said, "Why did you have to talk about him now?" Paris asked nervously, "What do you mean?" Celine replied, "The ghost story." But Paris said, "It never bothered me before. And I didn't know that anyone in the world could be afraid of ghosts. At this time, the ghost was watching them from afar. And here, when Celine saw it, she screamed from the depths of her being. She pulled him away quickly and said to him, "Let's get out of here. Come on." Paris replied, "Okay." Celine continued pulling him along, saying, "Hurry!" At the same time, she thought to herself, "Thinking about it, it's a world where dragons and magic actually exist. It's impossible that there wouldn't be ghosts." She remembered how scared she was of them as a child and continued to think to herself, "I was so scared of ghosts before, but at that time I would tell my mind that it wasn't real. But that's not possible here." Then she looked at Paris and thought to herself, "But isn't this too much? They say that humans are the scary ones, but are you so indifferent to this extent? He's not even interested in me. I'm really upset." Suddenly, as they were leaving, the gate opened and a carriage entered. Paris looked at her in surprise and thought to himself, who was patrolling outside at this time? Anyway, the people under my command are all useless. And here, the carriage stopped. The Empress, who was Paris's sister, got out of it. She looked at Paris and said, "It's been a long time, brother." Paris replied, "It has been a while, sister." His sister then said, "I heard you got a wife." Celine was looking at them in surprise. Suddenly, Paris stood in front of her and said to his sister, "There's no need to worry about that." His sister fell silent and gave him a stern look. After taking Celine to her room, he hurried to his sister and said, "Why are you here?" And here, his sister said, "I don't need a reason to come home." Paris replied, "I don't think you came all this way without a reason." His sister smiled and said, "I heard the news on the way. Are you looking for a sorceress?" Paris said angrily, "That didn't happen." His sister asked, "Can I help you?" Paris replied, "I don't need your help." His sister said, "You seem to be on good terms with your wife." But Paris told her, "You don't need to care." His sister said, "We are family now, so we have to get used to each other's faces." But Paris told her, "Pretend she's not there and live as you used to." His sister smiled and said, "What if I meet her on the street later and we fight? We should at least know each other's faces so that this doesn't happen." Paris grabbed his throat and said, "Don't even think about playing the same game unless you want to turn the Imperial Palace into a sea of fire." And here they looked at each other for a bit in silence. Then she sighed and said, "It seems that leaving the battlefield and living far away was worth it, fortunately." As Paris left, he thought to himself, "All witches are like this, arrogant, scheming, and manipulating anything with their fingertips." Then he clenched his fist in anger and continued to think to himself, "It's very annoying that the Imperial Palace and the ghosts do whatever they want." But he stopped and said, thinking about it, "Is there a witch who is afraid of ghosts? Witches usually treat ghosts like their relatives." So he started thinking and said, "There is more evidence to find the real Celine. Witches who are afraid of ghosts are very rare, and usually when a witch takes a body, the soul of the original body's owner is destroyed or trapped. But such an innocent, weak-hearted witch, it would be impossible for her to do something like that." So he fell silent. Then he smiled and said, "I will make sure to finish this, just in case the original owner of the body cannot return." The next day, Celine woke up happily and said to herself, "Oh, I slept well. Should I wake Paris up? I'll ask him to have breakfast together." but she noticed that Paris was already in the room. Oh my God! And here she hid under the covers. When Paras noticed her, he went to her. Celine was crying and thinking to herself, "Oh, what should I do? Did he see everything? I just woke up and my face was puffy. I yawned really loudly, too. Just imagining it makes me hate it so much. I'm so embarrassed," Paras said to her nervously. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." Celine looked at him and said, "What brought you here in the morning?" Paras fell silent nervously and thought to himself, "Can I be honest and tell her that there is a dangerous witch, referring to his sister Billis, who is after her now? And that she is a weak-hearted rabbit, who is afraid of ghosts even. She might get discouraged when she knows the truth. My sister is different from other witches. This woman will be eaten in one bite, without even realizing it. I have contacted the Empire to take the witch away. Until then, I just have to be careful. But what excuse should I give for staying now?" And here Celine was shocked and said to him in fear, "I'm sorry. I was a little surprised." Paris used this lie to stay and said, "I don't want to scare you, but I think you should know. Nevis has disappeared since we were there yesterday. You might like this." He was referring to the ghost, Celine said in shock. "What? Did he go? I love—" "What?" Paris sat down next to her and said, "There's a servant guarding Nevis, but he says he disappeared early in the morning. Nevis often preys on single women and tries to take over their bodies. He succeeded in scaring her, and she covered herself up." Paris asked, "What are you doing?" Celine said, blushing with embarrassment. "Nothing, but I shouldn't be alone, should I?" Paris replied, "Really?" He thought to himself, "Oh my God!" He scared her even more and pointed to the window, saying, "Oh, there's something." He succeeded in this because Celine grabbed his arm and said in fear, "What? What?" Paris looked at her and smiled, thinking to himself, "If I do a good job, I might be able to live with her." But as he tried to scare her further, Methel knocked on the door. Methel entered with breakfast and said, "I'll help you get dressed." Celine rushed to her and said, "Thank goodness, Methel." Paris looked at Methel. He thought to himself, "This was a very enjoyable atmosphere. How can an ignorant maid like this be a duchess's maid? Why is Celine distancing herself, as if she's so happy with this? If it weren't for her being Jart's younger sister, I would have fired her immediately." When Methel noticed Paris's gaze at her, she felt nervous. She remembered her brother Yarrow's words to her when he advised her before working for Celine. "A warning for survival. Listen carefully, sister. If it appears that my master is in a bad mood, stay close to her happiness. It will save your life." And here, Methel said to him, "I will keep that in mind, brother." But when we return to reality, we find Methel frozen with fear. So Celine asked her and said, "What's the matter? Methel, you will wait, right?" And his expression changed completely. And he said, "Of course." Then they looked at each other in embarrassment. So when Methel left, she said to herself, "You were right, brother. Staying by the Duchess's side is my safe haven. I must protect her." The scene changes to Celine, leaving the room with Paras. Suddenly, she started looking at the grass and said to herself, "The place is definitely warmer than it was when I first arrived." Then, with a gentle smile, she said, "It's spring." Paris approaches her and asks, "What's there? Why are you smiling?" Celine replies, "The white butterfly over there. I think it looks just like me. It has to find flowers to get honey, but there are no flowers here. It doesn't have a home to protect it, and no one to care for it. When the wind blows, it will fall, but it will be brave. I thought that for some reason when I saw it flying in search of flowers." Paris looks at her and thinks to himself, "You're making it sound like you're going to leave here soon. That means your stay here with me is temporary." He places his hand on her shoulder and says, "I can do that. A home to protect you, someone to care for you. I can do that."